and welcome to the podcast. On today's episode, I'm talking to two pharma giants, Michelle Warner and Sian Feller, about their new project, which they started only 7 months ago, called the Patient Project. Their goal in the Patient Project is to really bring the patient voice to the centre of everything. And I really love this mission, and I hope that you enjoy this episode. But before you listen, don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel if you want more pharma and biotech content. Let's get into the episode. Welcome to the podcast. I've got a really big question for you at the start of the podcast, and that is really, what's the why behind the Patient Project? Like, what problem are you absolutely obsessed with trying to solve? And maybe I'll go to you, Michelle.
So probably the best place to start are our own personal stories. So from a work perspective, we were both championing patient engagement, but we were a little bit frustrated by some of the challenges that we were facing. And then in our personal lives, we suddenly found ourselves caring for our parents. So both Sian's mum and my dad having been diagnosed with dementia. And it was just really difficult, even for us, to find the latest patient relevant research findings and any potential trials that they could participate in. So I suppose basically a realization that even though pursuing clinical outcomes, so the HCP needs, was important, we just really wanted to focus on outcomes that really matter to patients and to their loved ones.
I love that.
Sian, anything to add to that?
Yeah. So you just said, Sian, what's the problem that you're obsessed with solving? I love the way you say obsessed. I mean, in the end, my first thoughts are this just shouldn't be difficult for anyone, pharma, anyone. And that's what's frustrating. And I've seen that over the last 10 years, whilst I've been working in bigger organizations. It can be seen as hard work, tricky with compliance, perceived as costly, working with patients, oh, it's going to cost a lot of money, confusing when it comes down to regulators and guidance and rules. And it's still easy for organizations, and that's not just large organizations, it's any organization, to cut the corner and not do it. Um, so so from my perspective, I'd just say that sometimes it's easier just to change your shoes. So I changed my shoes. I decided to change my view. I decided to change the context I was in, and step out and look at it from this angle, not working within a big organization, and then start to drive what, I and Michelle think is really important.
Would you say, Sian, that the problem, I suppose, is best described as patient voices are not really being heard? So that,
Yeah.
and our obsession was
Yeah.
about truly listening, truly partnering, advocating together with others on shared goals.
Love it. No, I'm really passionate about this topic. You really hit the nail on the head that for some reason it always drops off. You have a strategic plan and you want to do all of these activities, and for some reason the patient, anything to do with patients or incorporating the patient voice, working with PAGs, patients, it always ends up kind of being deprioritized. And I love that you're kind of really trying to sort of bring that to the forefront and with your clients. If you could redesign the healthcare system completely from scratch, what role would the patient voice play in that from day one?
Now we're dreaming, Sian.
Yeah,
Redesign
totally
the healthcare
dreaming.
system. But it's a great question. And then I start to slightly panic and think, and then expand it to globally, because healthcare systems are different wherever you are. And then it gets really tricky, doesn't it? But you're going to hear Michelle and I say the same word or terminology over and over, and that's the importance and understanding behind partnership. So, you say, what role would the patient voice play from day one? It's got to be as a partner, and that the organizations that partner with patients understand what that actually means. What does partnership mean with patients? And, to us, that's a continual relationship. It's a valid and relevant relationship, and it's got shared goals and objectives, and it's got to be based on unmet need and deep insights. So it's simple. What about you, Michelle?
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. Patients as true partners across the board, whether that's bringing insights into informed decision making across the whole system, just thinking about that in its general term, or then more specifically, if you think about the role of patients in pharma, their voice could just inform so much more. You know, that research prioritization, the trial design and delivery, health technology assessment decisions, educating healthcare professionals and pharmaceutical colleagues, and communicating the science. So, my personal view is that pharma should really employ people with that lived experience in the disease areas that they're focused on. If you think about all the people that we've worked with for many years, some amazing scientists, physicians, marketers, etc. But actually, the patient experts could and should be sitting at the table, really informing those needs, shaping those trial designs, etc., etc. Um, I remember, was it Robert Mitchell Thane, Sean?
Mm.
He asked us a question, it was yesterday, and he said, you know, how many people do you think work at Ferrari and don't drive a car? And it really made me think that, of course, they live and breathe that experience of driving and bring it to their working world. Why don't we do that with patients?
Yeah. And Sian, if I can add to that, there just happens to feel like there's a more serious note to the Robert Mitchell Thane comment. I mean, I don't know whether you know of him if you're not in that disease area, but he's a CEO of the PBC Foundation. That's a rare disease with, very few options for patients. And he posted something on LinkedIn this week, I think, which was his experience as a
At the
patient
weekend.
advocate and lead of a patient advocacy organization. Um, he'd been working with a company developing a new medicine. Sorry, that company was developing a new medicine, and he'd obviously been a critical voice. And I'll leave you and listeners to read the post, but actually, what he does is he highlights something that's probably not unique.
Yeah, yeah. Um, and I've got the quote actually in front of me that really hit home from LinkedIn,
Mm,
which he says, his comments are really stark. He says, who was in the room when this strategy was decided upon? As we are already gambling, I would put a pretty penny that patients were not. So yeah, not the best of examples, and there's many more positive ones that I'm sure we'll get onto.
No, but it's important to sort of see the how not to do it as well as the the good examples, I think, as well, so you can avoid those pitfalls. But
mm.
I guess my question now is kind of like, why now? Why was it the right time for you to set up the patient project?
Well, I suppose part of it is the personal stories that we've already shared. But also, we had that great fortune to be taking an active lead on patient engagement when we were working at GSK in the global specialty care medical function. So we were bringing in insights from patients and the organizations advocating for them. And we were loving doing that, probably more so than any other part of our work. And then at the same time, and we're all very aware of the external environment, there was this growing focus from regulators. There was guidance being issued on the need for patient-focused drug development from bodies such as FDA and EMA. And I'd come across ISPEP, it's the International Society for Patient Engagement Professionals, and joined that society, and then learnt that there were just so many patient engagement roles in pharma that were being lost. So we just figured out that our expertise was going to be needed to help address those gaps. And
I spoke to a few people who were impacted by the cuts in the patient partnering team in pharma. So I think you guys kind of stepping in, providing that bespoke service, I think is really valuable. Where companies have kind of cut those positions. So props to you both, really, for kind of recognizing that that's such an important missed opportunity in many cases. So, what was the moment in your career or your personal life where you realized the patient voice is being ignored and this needs to really change?
Hmm. I suppose the first thing to say is there probably wasn't one moment. What happened for me personally was I had the chance, I've said it before actually, I had the chance to change my shoes. And I did that early on in my career. I had to when I had my first child. I stepped out of an organization at the time. It was frustrating me, and I did my own thing for a bit. So I suppose I wasn't really frightened of that. Also, I'm older, and I had the support to try putting some of the thinking into practice, and trial an innovative approach, which I'd not had the chance to do where I was. So yeah, I just jumped and tried it, and together we're making it work, and we're having a lot of fun along the way, really. What about you, Michelle?
Yeah, I agree with you. It was absolutely more an accumulation than one definitive moment. But I do vividly recall a conversation I was having with the head of policy and research at Asthma and Lung UK. And despite her having really good professional relationships with all the key pharma companies working in that therapy area, she said that the only organisation she would really hold up as having a true focus on the patient was LifeArc. And I just thought, I can't
Mm.
possibly have spent more than 30 years in pharma and not at least try to make the sort of difference that I knew was possible.
Completely agree, and I think you're able to do it now. I think without the constraints of working in a big company. That's the beauty of what you're able to do. I think as a independent small company, I love it. What's something about your own journey that that people might be surprised to learn shaped this work?
Um, well, I actually had a diagnosis of breast cancer. It was right at the beginning of COVID. It was just so very different in a positive way to the one that I'd experienced with my mum. So mine was, well, it is an example of the power of an empowered patient. I was really well informed thanks to the patient advocacy group that I joined on getting the biopsy results. And I'll be forever grateful to the members who answered all my questions and pointed me in the right direction for trusted information, and those that shared their own stories to help me prepare for what was very much an unknown few months and years ahead. And then I was able to use what I'd learned in the consultations I was having with the healthcare professionals. I'd found lay summaries of treatments that were on offer, and I just made sure that I could tackle, I suppose, anything that I knew was coming, and would have as little impact as possible on my really busy life. Then I was, I was thinking about how different that was for my elderly mum. Same diagnosis, but it was just so different for her. She just didn't have any sort of a say on her own journey and very little comprehension of what was happening to her. And I thought, well, it's so important that I've been able to inform my own patient journey. And it's definitely shaped the work that I wanted to do, with the hope that that would then lead to more patient empowerment for more people. Sian, anything from you?
Mm. Yeah. So um,
Surprising.
I don't know if it's surprising. I'm one of many, many people. But I suppose from my perspective, it's got to be the journey I'm going on. I've gone on and I continue to go on with my mum, who was diagnosed with Alzheimer's quite definitively in 2020. 2020 was a difficult year, not one of the better years to be diagnosed with anything, is it? Um, and I suppose before then, life was just normal. And then suddenly I became this person, this caregiver, that had to walk alongside her, helping her take the decisions and, big ones, life-changing ones like moving house, when to move house, where to move house, and just trying to keep stuff on an even keel. And that role, I mean, it's a very privileged role, but it's also a really scary one. So you're the guide for their life. I liken it a bit to being a bit of a bodyguard now, as you want to just make sure they're as safe as possible. So that's what drives me with the patient project.
So essentially, you're patient and caregiver yourself, as well as
Mm,
scientists and communicators and things. So you're kind of combining all of those really into what you're working on. I love that because that brings some authenticity to what you're doing. How do
yeah.
you stay connected to the real patient experience? I have a feeling I know some of that because you've just shared a little bit. but especially when you're working with these big institutions and it can feel so removed from, the individual, I suppose.
Well, one of the things that we've developed, which was a nugget of an idea 18 months, 2 years ago, was something we've called living proof. And that's um, direct conversations between patients, no physician experts or others in that conversation, but patients talking to patients, or patients talking to caregivers, or caregivers talking to caregivers. And we saw a real gap in the development of human content. So we're in a world where the amount of data, the amount of content is just exploding. It's exponential. So of course we have to have sophisticated AI approaches to insight generation and thematic insights. And not that we've all stopped thinking about the individual patient, but it felt the right moment to develop something that would put that humanness back in and bring the authenticity back into the conversation. So that's personally how I've put my finger on keeping close to the patient experience. I mean, Michelle, we've done other things, haven't we, that would contribute to that question?
We have, and I was just thinking about our audience and a few tips, I guess, on how to do exactly this if you're not having the luxury of doing something like Living Proof. So we both attend a lot of patient centricity conferences. We follow a lot of patients on social media, patient advocates. I've mentioned it before, we're members of the International Society of Patient Engagement Professionals, which includes an awful lot of patients and patient organisations themselves. And I mean, even if you look back at what we were doing before we set up the patient project, we always made time to participate and learn from patients in the patient councils, in the advisory groups that we did with patients and patient organisations themselves. So yeah, quite a mixed way of really keeping ourselves real and engaging with the people that can really help to inform what it's like to be living with a disease, or even a risk of a disease or an infection, etc.
And you already mentioned it, your patients and carers yourself. So I think that probably keeps it at the forefront as well of your mind. You said that size is the enemy in big pharma, and I can relate to that when it comes to patient centricity. Break that down for me. What does that really mean?
Well, it just makes it so much more difficult, doesn't it, for patients and those that represent them to figure out who to contact in the first place and then who to remain connected with. Imagine the challenges when there's large teams in place and there's individuals forever changing, and that can be across multiple functions, across research and development organizations, across medical, commercial, communications. So that's probably one of the first things that I would call out if I was breaking it down. And then the way budgets are agreed and managed well, it can be a challenge in a bigger organization. They work on an annual basis, and often that true patient partnership requires a much longer term commitment. So the worlds of big pharma and the patient groups themselves and patients themselves doesn't always collide. And I remember we were working on, it was an external stakeholder collaboration and partnership plan that we were trying to put together. And it did require input from all of these different functions and multiple budget holders. And frankly, without a determined and dogged approach to getting the plan over the line, I'm not sure we would have ever really got there.
Yeah.
Sian, do you agree
Yeah,
with that?
I'm reflected a little bit on your question setup. And maybe it's more than just large organizations. I think maybe we were being a bit black and white at that point, but I think it might be more nuanced with size. Often, yeah, size often makes things difficult, and Michelle's just described how. So really, I would say it's all down to the people. It's down to their energy, their aspirations, their commitment to what they're trying to do. And we could use the term fight when you're fighting to get that patient engagement included, or maybe you're just competing. That's the honest truth. You're competing with other groups, other people who have
Yeah.
similar aspirations and goals. You need to have the energy, you need to have the focus, you need to have the resilience, but you need to be clear, and you need to be calm, and you need to have rationale why it's so important. And often high emotion doesn't get what you need in the boardroom. I think we all have experienced that. So getting that right takes experience and patience, and we know it's really worth it when it happens.
Yeah, completely agree. I mean, I would even say, I suppose, sometimes even a small company, if they're not aligned on their
Yeah.
vision or their strategy, then it's a bit mismatched, and there's no clarity on who's owning that or what they're trying to achieve and things. So, I have a question around, is there a moment when you saw a lot of bureaucracy or processes actually harming the patient voice? I mean, have you come across this? And I guess, what did you learn from that, if you have?
Well, yes, sadly, that has been the case in the past. And if I try and think of an example, maybe scientific congressing is a good one. We were working on a symposium, I remember, and really wanted to engage a patient as part of the faculty. Compliance had advised against it because they had concerns about the patient taking part, particularly in the full session when the company's data was presented. And their suggestion was the patient then leaves the stage so they can have their little moment, but then they've got to go. And as we'd wanted the patient to be central to the panel discussion, in fact, we really wanted them to question and challenge the other faculty members. I remember thinking this would only be tokenistic engagement if we did proceed with that advice. And in fact, that policy could, or implementing something as black and white as that, could, worst case scenario, lead to disengagement. And in terms of what I learned from that, and it was a big learning curve at the time, it's just, compliance are our friends, and they're absolutely critical to an industry such as pharmaceuticals. But it's critical that that we treat compliance as colleagues, very much as partners, that they're brought into the thinking early. And what I wouldn't do if I was in that situation again is try and present to them a defined plan. I'd just outline what the objectives were and what we were trying to achieve, and then seek advice on how we can achieve those objectives in the most compliant way.
And I'd also say in terms of that question, Sean, the onus is also on us as medical affairs professionals, patient engagement professionals. It's easy to place blame on bureaucracy and process. And I know it's easy because I know I've done it. But there are reasons behind those processes being there. And they're normally, obviously, protection, company protection. And then if there's protection there, and maybe it seems overly stringent, often it's because something not so good has happened. So I suppose my response to that would be, what we need to do as medical professionals with expertise in working with patients is understand risk properly. And that is a skill. So don't think of it as rules and regulations. Think of the intent behind what you're doing, the perception of how what you're doing will land externally, and think about the risk, and work it through.
So completely agree with you.
Yeah, and when we talk about partnership, Sian had mentioned, you'll hear partnership from us a lot. Instead of this is what we want to do, it's actually this is what we want to achieve, and then how can we pool our resources, our expertise, how can we do that together? And then you've suddenly got less duplication, you've certainly got much more buy-in, and even more importantly, you've got an intimate understanding of what patients need and want, and that can then be the North Star for the whole of the rest of that project.
Exactly. And likely the output is much more authentic, meaningful, vastly improved, So yeah, I completely agree. You always see patient centricity is kind of one of the pillars in the, the ambitions of so many big pharma biotech companies. What's the difference between companies that do patient centricity and those that actually live it? And how can you tell the difference in the work that you're doing?
It's a great question. But, when living patient centricity, it's evident that patients are the North Star for everyone. Everybody has that on their mind. Their needs, the patient needs, are front and center, and decisions and plans are based on the patient insights, and patients are involved in shaping those plans. So they might do that through partnership. And that would be from research through to education and communicating the company's science and outcomes that are being pursued as, I suppose, patient relevant, irrespective of the function that we're talking to, at least. So, it's a continuum. So it starts early and carries on post medicine, hopefully making it through review and approval. And I'd say, well, why wouldn't you do that? The patient is the end user. They'll always surprise you, and they will always be inspired by innovation for something that could directly impact theirs and their loved ones' lives for the better. They're crying out to be involved, and they're great partners to work alongside.
Yeah, I think it's about the fact that it's action really rather than words when you're seeing people really live patient centricity. And it's evident. So you're looking at trial endpoints that really matter to patients, and they're endpoints based on insights that have clearly had patient input. You've got a publications plan with patients as co-authors. The educational materials that are produced are the kind of materials that make sense to anybody who perhaps isn't a scientist.
Yeah, it's brilliant. I was actually quite pleased to see that the good publications practice, the fourth update, has included some guidance for pharma companies around patient authorship and how to handle that. And I think that will help pharma companies as well to kind of at least that element of it is then clearer than it used to be in the past. Nice question about like what are you the most proud of since you started the patient project? And what was a moment when you kind of said, oh, yes, this is actually working?
Well, we're obviously very proud of Living Proof, and you've heard from Sian about what that's all about. We've had incredibly positive feedback from everybody we've shared it with so far, and we'd just love to do more with more patients living with or at risk of more healthcare challenges that they might be facing. But there's also our consultancy work. There was one client that we worked with. They're a US-based biotech, and we started working with them back in January. And I remember them saying, my face was a picture, wasn't it, Sian? Well, we just need to really tick this box about patients and doing an advisory board. But by the time we came to the end of the project, the shift in their attitude towards the importance of this work was phenomenal. So they became really excited about the opportunity to partner with the patient community. In the advisory 2-day session that we held, 100% of the patients and the caregivers that were all there wanted to continue to bring their own voices into the work that the company were doing. And so we've witnessed it spontaneously with people copying us into some of the emails back to the company or posting a few things on LinkedIn. And it's been really, really rewarding. There were 2 patient organizations, one in the US, one in Europe. They are now fully committed to partnering with that biotech on their next steps, and they want to be updated on how well or otherwise that trial that they're moving into phase 3 on soon actually progresses. So that would probably be another highlight for recent work. Sian, anything from you?
Yeah, what are we proud of? I suppose, Sian, mine is also quite simple and backing up a bit, and that's how we've developed our network. And, just had masses and masses of really great conversations, people we've known, people we haven't spoken to for a while, and then being passed on to other people. And I can't think of a bad one. Every time you meet a new organization or a person or an individual, it feels like we're learning, and I'm really proud of that. The power of the network is incredible, whether it helps us directly or whether we're passing that conversation on because we know somebody else might be able to do something with that. And there's nothing like it, and it's not something that comes naturally, I think, to everybody, but it's something we both love because, as you can see, we do quite like to talk. So there's that. And then I think just backing up behind that, and I don't say this very often, in fact, probably this is the first time I've said it out loud. I'm proud we made the change. I I would describe us as female entrepreneurs of a certain age, which does sound grand, but it's basically true. Not being afraid to fail at something that is so out of your comfort zone when you've been, we've been cushioned in a large organization for a long time. And it's priceless watching people's faces when you say, "Oh, we're doing okay. It's been a great 7 months. Looking forward to the next." And then when I think of myself personally, we're setting, or me, Michelle, and me setting an example for our daughters and sons, my son, that you can do anything really if you've got the energy and the vision and you're not scared to fail. That's what I'd say I'm proud of.
Oh, I love it. And you guys, I remember speaking with you right at the word go, and you've done incredible work. Like already, I mean, it's only been 7 months, and I think it's true testament to how well respected you both are in the industry. That people are kind of coming to you, and also I think it shows that there's a real need, in the industry. And I love your example that you had, Michelle, because so you're kind of you're not only making sure that PAGs are working very closely with these companies, but you're actually inspiring people internally who will hopefully move to other companies and bring that mindset, I think. So I love that. I think we touched on it earlier when you mentioned like the compliance being our friends. But what would you say to somebody who wants to kind of work on patient projects, or they want to kind of bring the patient voice into their work, but they feel like they're kind of there's a compliance person going, no, you can't do that, or there's some red tape. What would you say to that person?
Well, I'd just say don't let any red tape phase you. Find like-minded colleagues, including the senior level sponsors, of which there are many, who share your belief in the importance of focusing in on the patient, and join some of those external groups. I've already mentioned ISPEP a couple of times, but it is a fabulous community and it's got heaps of resources that we can all tap into, that really, really bring strong examples of the value of the patient voice into the industry. And sometimes people need evidence, don't they? So that's a good place to go to. And maybe my other bit of advice would just be start small. I think sometimes people set off with such an ambitious plan about how to get to somewhere that it's just not doable. So start small, but just make that work really visible and measure the impact that has. And then bringing the patient into your own individual plans, a team meeting, etc. Just try it.
I mean, red tape, if you think of it as red tape, it is soul destroying, it's energy sapping, but it is there for a purpose. And yeah, I did a piece of work on a global project, and I really enjoyed it because in the end, you said it, Michelle, senior level sponsors share the belief and importance of what you're trying to achieve. And we don't need to talk about the SP, we don't need to talk about what happened, but actually what matters is understanding any legal constraints so that what you're seeking to achieve through putting some guidance, you can call it red tape, but everybody has to have red tape and guidance in, you do it with the understanding of, you understand the risk associated with it, you understand how you're going to communicate that to your colleagues clearly, and you'll be able to give examples of how that can be carried out. So yeah, first-hand experience of doing that and being successful in that. But my recommendation to anyone who's listening would be, don't forget the onus is on us as well patient engagement professionals or medical affairs professionals to understand the consequences and perception of what we're doing. And if you can do that, then you're probably going to be fine because you'll be engaging with the right people to keep you on the right path.
Yeah, and I think you're right about the mindset. If you go in with the mindset, oh, it's just red tape, I think I've always experienced if you bring the compliance person and in very early, you're like describing your vision and things like that, then you can kind of like shape what's possible really early on, rather than kind of going down the road of trying to do lots of big things, as you say, Michelle, and then finding out actually we can't do this, and then you have to kind of backpedal. I think it's better to just make sure you've read all the SOPs and kind of bring that compliance person in early on when you're shaping the project before you start involving external stakeholders as well. So fast forward 5 years, what does success look like for the patient project? And what's changed in the industry because of you?
Well, the patient project is it's quite simply focused on 3 areas. So we have got patient engagement and expert engagement as one bit. So think external, and then we've got actually how do we help in terms of scientific communications, and then the third bit is how do we build external engagement skills. So we did sit, didn't we, Sian, right at the beginning and ask ourselves pretty much this question. So we might as well just describe what we said at the time, which would be that thanks to the patient project's involvement, we can see that there's a clear shift in particularly non-expert patient insights informing different companies' strategies and plans, and that would be across the different functions. So that would be ideal on that section. And then on a scientific communications front, what you would see, thanks to our input, would be that the patients and the patient organisations are really front and centre as priority stakeholders, and you're seeing things that we've just been talking about, like co-authored publications, etc., and patients themselves very much part of the delivery of those activities. And then on the third part about building that capability, you would see that patient advocacy engagement is really valued as a core capability, and the budgets are following that particular team or particular focus that a company has. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, perfect. I've got one last question before we go. And what would be one thing you want every person who's working in pharma to understand about the patient voice? Maybe something that they don't fully understand right now.
Well, you can't, I think I'd just say you don't rely solely on large data-driven sources for the patient voice. It's absolutely complementary, but don't rely on it solely. It needs human stories, lived experience over time, ideally, to get that true insight.
And just in case our audience aren't insights driven or insights focused, I'm hoping that we might have some commercial colleagues on the audience as well. So without that patient voice being central to, well, the research, the development, and the commercialization decisions and plans, frankly, success is going to be unlikely. And one fact that I remember very early on in us setting up the patient project coming across was that if you look at drug development and those that are using patient-centric designs, there's a 20% more likely launch success. Basically, if for anybody's looking for some numbers, this is where it's at.
Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I really love your mission and ambition. I think it's just such a worthwhile pursuit that I'm wishing you guys the best of luck, and I'm sure you'll do brilliantly. You already are, really doing incredible things right now. So thank you so much for coming on the podcast, and yeah.
Thanks for asking us.
Thank you so much for inviting us. Yeah.
You're welcome.